we've always taken a very filmic view of narrative. Although we're using game engine and we're using 3D graphics, we really started from the kind of kino automat philosophy. We have a film, how would it be if the audience could interfere with the action and change the course of action? And you know, throughout the years, we've developed various components from various perspectives, and we grew increasingly frustrated about the fact that it was very difficult to get something which was unified either at the level of practice, so working systems where there's a balance across the system. You're not completely sacrificing camera control to plot generation, or not sacrificing interaction to generation. And even more difficult at the conceptual level. And this is what we've tried to do lately. And first of all, I'm going to talk about our effective approach to interactive storytelling across this whole spectrum I've described. So from the actual staging, the cinematic aspect, from feelings conveyed by characters, the effective model of story reception by the viewer and the user if he's interacting, and possibly also effective interfaces for the interaction system. And in this talk, before getting to the BCI aspects, I'll talk about something which was done last year and the year before about physiological sensing, which were our early experiments. Thank you very much. Yeah. Our early experiments that went down. Then, from this finding, there's a chicken and egg problem between your effective model and your effective interface model, and we'll talk about the trade-off between non-empathic filmic models and empathetic filmic models, and that would lead us to probably the core of this presentation, which is our latest work on empathetic BCI using a neurofeedback paradigm. So the origins, effective interactive storytelling. We've developed a certain number of systems through the years, and one thing which became clear very quickly was that if you were planning on using some form of unconstrained language interface, whether it was spoken or written, to interface to and interact with a reasonably complex story, you have no chance of seeing that to the level of performance you would need. So there was general frustration, like you were able to grow longer stories, breaking the, not Matthias 10 minutes per year, but very close to it. You can get 8-9 minutes interesting stories, but the NLP part for the interaction was very far behind. And we started looking at other mechanisms, and progressively we moved to effective interfaces. So you remember our 2009 system and paper, which was just using effective speech recognition with the Madame Bovary character as a way of fooling the user into believing that what he was saying was actually understood. But it's still, that was not completely satisfactory. So we took a step back and decided to work on the effective content of the filmic experience. So we researched the dominant models and theories of effective filmic perception. And if I want to simplify this, there are essentially two main schools of thought. One is Stan, who considers that empathy towards the featured characters is one of the main drivers of emotional response to a film. And Smith was taking an opposite view, thinks that empathy is actually not that relevant, and it's more a control loop and process by which it's the editing, it's the presentation, it's the direction, it's you're sending out emotional cues which are priming the user, inducing a state where the user is more receptive to the action, and in that system it explains the effective response. All these are described in Smith's book, which is on the structure of emotion in film. And we decided to develop our first completely effective system to explore what Smith had proposed, to have a system whereby you'll have a story which can be adapted. This story would generate effective cues via music, via camera shots. We really try to implement Smith theory. Then you would look at the effective response from the user, and the way to do that would be to use peripheral physiological signal. And of course you would feed back into the story. Creating a system like that, so you're visualizing the action and the usual T-side paradigm, which is to use the Unreal Engine on a kind of machinima mode, plugged to a certain number of interfaces, and of course with an engine behind that, which includes the narrative engine really strictly for plot generation and all the added machinery, which is more the discourse aspect and the editing aspect. So we've decided to explore two main physiological signals, galvanic skin resistance and electromyography. I'm going to explain why these two and in which circumstances, but basically the idea of this Smithian system is that we're generating a drama. The user is hooked to GSR and facial EMG, and from the signals you are driving changes in story, but in the Smithian loop. So there's cues, you're monitoring the response, and then you further affecting both the plot and the next generation of cues. Why did we use GSR and EMG versus other things, including heart rate or including some raw EEG measures? Several reasons. We wanted to have a good valence arousal model, so we had GSR with a good correlation to arousal. And EMG, you can get positive and negative valence if you're getting the corrugator and the zygomaticus. There's a problem with the corrugator that everybody knows about. It's when people are frowning because they have problem in using the system, you don't know whether the frowning signals interface difficulties or they are reacting negatively to the content, which is why you've seen in lots of papers, including ours, the positive valence that you get through the zygomaticus is always more useful than the negative one. There's also a timing effect. Your sampling rate for GSR is in the order of a second. And well, from 100 milliseconds to 1 second. EMG responses, they are more to the dozens of milliseconds to 100 milliseconds. And that also matches, interestingly, to narrative properties, which is better explained by showing the next slide. We've moved a lot through our system from generating stories which themselves were planned, which is the old and basic riddle and Jung assumption, but it works very well for certain genres like the bank robbery where the story itself is a plan, but generally speaking that's not the case. So we moved back from that to using planning systems which are better at controlling the trajectory of the story, and which is also a very good mechanism for controlling tension. And GSR, with its arousal-based response and with its timing, is actually plugged into the system into this form of tension control, whilst EMG gives instantaneous response to specific semantic categories of actions and tells you what the preferences of the users are, and that feeds back into the planner for the selection of a certain type of actions, a certain semantic of what's going to happen, rather than just the pure pace or tension. So we've lost this slide was just actually this one magnified. So no big deal here it is. What we're doing is that we're generating our own system. We need GSR is really subject specific. So you're measuring GSR against the threshold of an atypical subject. You need a specific calibration, and of course there is a minimal amount, which can be fairly high, of signal processing to do to detect thresholding and also certain interesting patterns, which is part of the system. And now our typical user, guinea pig, volunteer, that was tested with quite a lot of subjects. With only half a casualty, we had an allergic reaction to the electrodes, but only one. So they're equipped with the with the GSR on the fingers of the non-dominant. This is the ProComp Infinity hub where you can plug everything you wish. And here she is wearing electrodes, facial electrodes, both for the corrugator and the zygomatics. This is the setting, so the user is watching the story. The story is generated dynamically. She reacts to what happens. The reaction is measured, interpreted, and then that changes the remainder of the story in these two directions. First of all, the cues. There's cueing, including with music, to create a certain state of expectation, and then there is the dramatic events themselves. The stories we're able to generate are up to 8 minutes in length. So that's and of course with so we don't have a lengthy walk through the corridors during 2 minutes. It's normalized for action duration. One first so important aspect of the system is to try to map also from a system perspective the tension, the dramatic tension to GSR as arousal. The way tension is measured is not the most sophisticated that it could be. For example, we're not using second-order derivatives of the heuristic function, which is used for the search-based planner, but we're using a semantic categorization of certain types of actions, and we're measuring forms of progression, so it's more like very simplistic algebra. It still gives a good measure of story speed of progression and tension, and actually it's a nice fit. I'll show that a bit more in detail. It's a nice fit with the GSR measure. So you've understood by now that the system requires quite a lot of re-engineering of the actions themselves. Actually, there are different sorts of actions. For any given narrative actions, you have different presentations, you have different dramatic versions playing on the effective dimensions for each action. So we're actually duplicating an action like, the dialogue, initial patient consultation or, bedside visit. We have several versions of these, more or less friendly, more or less tense. Regardless of the content, you can have a chat about who gets the case, which is tense or which is neutral or which is humorous. So we're duplicating these using, of course, a limited number of effective tags: intensity, menace, and dominance. I forgot to say something important. Sorry for that. We needed a story which can generate empathy and which has some element of a real story. So we opted for medical dramas on the grounds that you have personal relationships and you have the more medical type of thing. And to make sure we would not fall into the usual trap, which is that you think that because you're researching narrative you can write any script yourself, we contracted someone whose name is Terry Borst in Santa Fe. And it's quite an interesting collaborator because he was a game designer for Weak Commander, but he also wrote the script for several episodes of Bugs for the BBC. So he's got experience both in interactive systems and drama, and he just helped us in drafting the type of events, we could have plundered one episode from House, for instance. But it was more interesting to kind of abstract and get the proper advice from a professional. So we did that previously as part of the Iris network on a preliminary version of this project. So we're having all this tagging, and so in our hospital we have the usual problems in hospital, including budget cuts, and we have a nice doctor. That's doctor back there. That's the lady, and we have a bad doctor, actually a nasty doctor. And that's Dr. Hathaway, and he's prepared to do anything to get his way. So you will have the personal relationships and you'll have the professional relationships, which have to do with how patients improve or deteriorate. So this is a quick view of the type of scenes that the system is generating. So at this stage, for instance, well, he did sabotage the protocol, and that caused the patient to go to the...
I need a force Europoline on an RB1 needle now.
We're losing blood, Doctor.
All that is generated in real time. This is a video, but the system generates in real time. So the Smithian approach, we've got the sound cues, we also have music, the sound cues, the camera motion, and everything. Just to not to make the presentation too dry, I'm slotting that in before we have more extensive examples. Now the cinematic idioms, we reuse part of the original thing that everybody puts into papers and nobody knows how to implement, not even ourselves. But we have selected what we thought would map best these effective categories I have mentioned. So of course for dominance or menace or showing that something is suspicious, you have these camera shots. And they're again incorporated, so we're actually multiplying the number of actual operators in the planning system, and they're specialized. For each action, we have a number of operators depending on the practical realization of the action. User response, what we have here is almost default and expected response. This is GSR, so this is arousal. Here you have a scene of sexual harassment, and here you have a scene where he's essentially sabotaging the medical protocol. And in both cases, subject who watch that, of course subject who have never seen the film, who have never worked on the film, who possibly have never touched a computer, real subjects, show these patterns, and of course some of you saw the blood spilling and you had exactly, if all of you were hooked with the system, I would have that pattern, and that's fairly regular. There's little surprise around that. What's more interesting is when people are not moved that easily, it is then the system which is adding more critical things, so more either medically gory or shocking at a relational level, bullying, harassment, the boss threatening, cuts and redundancies. All that, of course, shot putting the character in a very miserable situation, and people, of course, they react negatively in terms of balance, but in terms of arousal, that raises their interest. There is a question that you have, and for which I don't have an answer. We don't know which model is best from an homeostatic model, where when people are getting excited, homeostatic is regulation. So if you're excited, should the system calm down, or instead, in a positive feedback, excite you even more? That we don't know and we couldn't find. It's an interesting user modeling problem, but I don't have the answer. A quick presentation trace of what a system is doing. So you start at some time on the action. Hathaway is harassing McNair, and then depending on the user-viewer reaction, if the user response is positive, that doesn't mean the user is supporting harassment, but that would keep the tension and the type of negative, let's say, they're not showing much sympathy for the character, so the system would continue plotting the demise of the nice character. If there's no user response, or it's non-conclusive, then you would generate something which is in between. So some negative actions, but not the same density as if you had a positive response. And when you have a negative user response, you are trying to, of course, in that system, not conspicuously, but make life a bit easier for the nice character. So these are actual recordings of the GSR tension compared to the tension measured through the heuristics we have in the narrative generator. There is actually quite a good match for that in those two situations that I outlined. First one is what happens normally. You're generating tense actions and you have these reactions, but also the capacity for the system to generate tension when the situation is too quiet. We evaluated that system with 23 subjects. We removed the one with the allergic reaction. And yeah, we put it inside the video in the hospital. They first watched a 2-minute baseline video to take the readings, the thresholding. And so this system is called Pinter, nothing to do, actually it has a lot to do with a certain writer, but that means passive interactive storytelling, because that was the first system where we were capturing a user input without the user conspicuously doing anything towards the characters. It's passive. And one other thing which matters for that evaluation, you don't want that the user to be distracted from the fact that he's hooked up and that the system has strong emotional scenes at the expense of the logical action. So we doubled that with a questionnaire to make sure that the logical structure of the story was understood by the users, and they were not just shocked and awed by the blood spilling, by the patients vomiting. We have a lot of that, and the ER running, and of course the result is that yes, I mean it works. Well, it works within that experimental setting and the constraints, but importantly, well, it's not very surprising that the GSR is using the system very significantly higher than the baseline. It works. I mean, people have that proper reaction. With the corrugator, you probably need to split into different categories of subjects. There are subjects who got the wrong attitude. They felt observed and measured, and they thought they had to stay calm. It was a bit of like a lie detector. But the game was not to show any emotion, or it was a medical training system that when blood was spilling, they had to remain as calm as possible. So we had this population. But in all populations, we had very significant responses. The most important thing is that this was not at the expense of logical understanding. With the quest analysis, they did understand who was the good guy, who was the bad guy, at which stage of the story turning points happened, which plot was foiled. They were not just moving from one rush of excitement, from one patient dying to one scene of harassment, one scene of redundancies. They got the plot preserved. So this is how it looks. So here Catherine is the subject, and so she's watching the film progressing. We have all these measures, and to different channels we have our threshold that feeds into the effective categories that you have seen for the planner. Staging of individual actions, there's a lot of editing and shooting. You see that, I mean, we worked on the characters to have decent quality, so they could be quite expressive. You have the evil boss. Well, the boss is actually can be either way, I mean, depending on that. And here, she's really miserable. You have a lot of these scenes where she's put into difficult situation. We have different versions. There's silent ones and TTS1 English. We have an Hebrew version, obviously, because we tested it in Israel. And of course, depending on where you're testing the noise levels, I'll explain later. You need double. Now, when you're testing it in an MRI machine, the noise levels are fairly high. And for that, we have an entire hospital. Which also it's a lot of investment to build a virtual hospital, so we're using it across projects. And it's called Big Society Hospital.
The sound not working.
No, this one is a silent
Oh, thanks
version.
God.
These exits. So that's a shot of an alternative outcome. Well, I couldn't come here with all the system. We demonstrated the system IUI. If you get up to T-side, you can test the system yourself. You have to sign an informed consent and confirm that you're not allergic to silver. but there's a good, variety of stories, and in another experiment we've been able to generate up to 800 stories. So on an average length of 7-8 minutes. Probably the best, even at the narrative level, it's probably the best stuff we've done so far. And so in some outcomes there can be, friends and nobody dies. It won't make great ratings on TV. So the tension on some specific scenes, there's the tension of the scene itself, then there's a relationship between the characters which obviously affected. And that's a big society hospital. So we did that. That's the kind of, that was a preliminary work to our latest thinking. We were still, in the beginning we were quite excited because we thought, well, Smith seems to be, the dominant effective filmic model. He's got a lot of compelling arguments. It's very respected. It ties very nicely into editing and real-time camera presentation and staging, which are always the poor cousins of narrative generation because everybody's obsessed by the plot. And then on looking back, we still found that it's a nice piece of engineering, but conceptually, you see that things have been put together. The great unification. Why can't have a model where there's one single concept and that one single concept does everything? It explains the user model, it underpins narrative generation, and it supports the interaction. What is difficult is that, surprise, surprise, that concept tends to be empathy, which is a precise concept. We've said, no, we're not going to use that because Smith says it's not relevant. And, but Wittgenstein saying that contradiction is a lesser evil than tautology. So we shamelessly embark on exploring a completely different concept, possibly also more ambitious, of brain-computer interfaces, completely based on empathy. That's a joint work with the Functional Brain Center at the University of Tel Aviv. So we were, to some extent we still are, but we've made a few steps, in search of a unified approach to effective models, so user watching film and possibly then an interactive narrative. What is the mechanism, the cognitive mechanism by which you engage with the story? And when I say cognitive now, I'm also thinking neural. Could I get the neural basis of that engagement? The cinematic techniques, what can you generate that precisely captures the rules of this form of engagement? And the interaction technique. Of course, if I know the neural basis of engagement, I could try a BCI interface on that basis. And that is our idea. So, the first thing, so renouncing ourselves, empathy maybe is not such a bad concept. However, nobody knows what is empathy. You're just using empathy. There are lots of that. Everybody has his own theory. Everybody has somebody else's theory. Everybody has secondary readings and writings. But, there is no real substrate. This is why, and this is where, our Tel Aviv colleagues come into play. This is an extraordinary paper that they've published in Neuroimaging. This is in search of the neural basis for the emotional response to film. And the new theory is to consider that you have to look at neural networks. Not neural networks that can be developed next door. I mean the anatomical structure, the dynamic activation, the temporal set of activation forming a network. Not just which part in the fMRI is flashing and which color it is. The complete functional network. And it's a long article that I'm summarizing, and I'll refer to you to the original article if you want all the details, knowing that, like many neuroscience articles, there's still a lot of debate at the end of the paper. The most important finding is that if you show two different films, one is Sophie Choice and the other one is Stepmom, both of them are about this losing a member of family, someone who's dear to your heart. It's about separation, whether it's immediate or deferred. But they are also said to elicit different types of empathy on the existing hypothesis about empathy. You know, the layman presentation of that is crying for someone or crying with someone. So you have two levels of empathy. The one you are really connecting and you're feeling the same, and the other one you more have a moral judgment and analyzing the situation and responding at a more abstract level, which is still sympathetically. The second one is called the theory of mind, model of empathy. And to cut a long story short, what they have in their paper is that if you look, so people were asked from when watching the film from inside the MRI machine to rate sadness in real time. And there is a strong correlation of one type of network in one type of film and one type of empathy, and the situation is reverted with the other one. So basically, what is here the medial prefrontal cortex, which is a structure which is about controlling emotion, is compatible with the theory of mind approach. A look at how well it is aligned with the Stepmom viewing, and it's not aligned at all with Sophie's Choice. We met these guys, and so we were really interested in working with them, and well, hopefully it was also the case on their side. And we thought, well, why can't we put that in action as a mechanism for BCI? That will be narrative BCI, that will be completely aligned with this idea of using theory of mind empathy. Now, when you're talking about BCI, what most people are thinking of is this.
Not quite.
Something which is
This will feel weird.
slightly intrusive. I mean, real BCI stuff that works, not just I'm sticking an electrode and saying, oh, there's an alpha wave. Close your eyes. Oh, now you're in World of Warcraft.
Just turn around, see the back of your head.
Of course, there are
That's my
BCI.
shoes.
Anyone with a few £100 can buy a BCI device or something which is called a BCI device.
Yeah.
I'm sure. How many people here have the emoji? Well, I would expect more, but it's a nice system. The problem is to match the technology with the science, and it's even nicer when it's sold like that. Although the reality is a bit more like that. It's much less glamorous and could be responsible for new epidemics of mohawks. And it works for some system. I did try a quite nice system, which is the Attention Deficit Disorder series game from the Open Vibe project. But one single electrode occipital used. I mean, you describe them as someone doing proper neurosciences. They wouldn't take that very seriously. And also the amount of data, the reliability of the data is not there. So in the previous work of BCI, there's a very good, very nice review of BCI for gaming by Anton Nieholz and his team. And you can categorize that in around 3 areas. The first one is really motor BCI, so you're trying to replace the mouse and try to push the ball with your mind or something like that. And it's popular, it's fun. I mean, you can attract some attention with that. There are general measures of state where essentially you're using the EEG signals as you in the same way that you would be using peripheral signals. There's a lot of work on that. There are some on ACM Multimedia where people are responding to video and film. And a bit more interestingly, there is neurofeedback. So in neurofeedback, you're not capturing a passive signal, you're asking people to concentrate on something, about something, in some way. We'll see that instructions are really critical. And that would create a positive feedback loop where the signal increases. And so when people really, through their thoughts, or what they think is their thoughts, are able to control something. Of course, you have to make sure that there are two main difficulties with neurofeedback. The first one is that some people can do it. It's a skill, and if you look at neuroscience papers, in some cases, to train people, they need like 3 weeks. So that doesn't make things very easy. And of course, you have to make sure that what people are doing is really what they ought to be doing. It's not like sometimes, if you're familiar with EEG, you can get a very simple change pattern by closing your eyes. That's not the kind of thing you want to do. You want the signal to really reflect some form of process. So you've seen the other BCI stuff. How is our BCI interface looking? Wow. So this is how it's looking. So we're a bit closer to the matrix than we are to the emotive. So why that? Because we have to do in MRI EEG. If we want to do an MRI validation of the neurofeedback process, we have to move to an MRI scan which is equipped to record EEG inside. And there are, it's getting more popular, but not many centers have that.